January 1945. Before dawn breaks over the Ryukyu Islands, Okinawa lies under a pale gray sky. Moist sea air hangs heavy over coral ridges and sugarcane fields. Far offshore, the Pacific swells roll with a dull, endless rhythm, and above them comes another sound, deep, mechanical, growing louder. It is the low thunder of radial engines warming in the darkness, a sound that carries across water and land alike, announcing that the sky itself is about to change. For Japanese commanders stationed across Okinawa and the nearby islands, this moment arrives at the edge of inevitability. By early 1945, the war has turned decisively against the Empire of Japan. Saipan, Guam, and the Philippines have fallen. American B-29s already reached the home islands. Okinawa, only about 350 miles from Kyushu, now stands as the last major defensive barrier before invasion of Japan itself. Japanese high command understands the stakes clearly. Whoever controls Okinawa's skies will control its fate. What they expect is grim but familiar. Years of combat have taught Japanese officers to prepare for sacrifice, attrition, and desperate resistance. They anticipate waves of enemy aircraft, but they also believe that skill, discipline, and the fighting spirit of their pilots can still impose a cost. Japanese doctrine emphasizes endurance and the willingness to die in defense of the emperor. The sky, in their planning, remains contested, bloody, dangerous, but not entirely lost. What arrives instead is overwhelming dominance. By the spring of 1945, the United States Marine Corps and Navy deploy large numbers of Vought F4U Corsairs to the Okinawa campaign. The Corsair, with its distinctive inverted gull wings and massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, is among the most powerful single-engine fighters of the war. Capable of speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour, heavily armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns or 4 20mm cannons, and rugged enough to absorb punishment, it represents the mature industrial output of a nation at full wartime production. Japanese commanders observe the skies fill not with isolated enemy aircraft, but with constant patrols. Corsairs arrive in squadrons, rotating endlessly, maintaining air superiority hour after hour. The recurring symbol of this domination is sound, the relentless, layered roar of engines that never seems to fade. Even during lulls in ground fighting, that sound remains overhead, a reminder that the sky belongs to someone else. Historical records from the Okinawa campaign document the scale of American air power with stark clarity. By April 1945, U.S. forces operate from dozens of carriers and newly captured airstrips, flying thousands of sorties per day. Marine fighter squadrons, such as VMF-214 and VMF-323, rack up impressive combat records. VMF-323 alone claims over 120 enemy aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat during the campaign. Japanese aviation units, already depleted and suffering from fuel shortages and inexperienced pilots, cannot replace their losses. Japanese expectations of aerial resistance collapse under this pressure. Pilots scramble to intercept Corsairs, only to find themselves outclimbed, outgunned, and outnumbered. American pilots benefit from superior radar control, coordinated fighter direction, and constant logistical support. Aircraft losses are repaired quickly, pilots are rotated, rested, and fed. The machine keeps moving forward. Japanese military reports from late 1945, compiled after the surrender, reflect a clear recognition of this imbalance. Officers note that American fighters appeared unceasing and that attempts to challenge them resulted in disproportionate losses. The psychological effect is as significant as the physical destruction. Commanders accustomed to planning operations around air cover now assume exposure as the default condition. The contrast is brutal. Japanese doctrine glorifies the decisive clash, the single heroic moment. The Americans bring something different: continuity. The Corsair's engine sound becomes a symbol of abundance. not just material abundance, but organizational abundance. Fuel, spare parts, trained pilots, aircraft carriers, airfields carved from coral, all flow together seamlessly. The war in the sky is not fought as a series of desperate duels, but as an ongoing system that grinds resistance down. This realization begins to transform perception. Some Japanese commanders, according to post-war interrogations, quietly acknowledge that the United States is fighting a different kind of war. It is not merely about courage or sacrifice, but about sustaining pressure indefinitely. The Corsair overhead is no longer just an enemy aircraft, it is a manifestation of an entire society mobilized for war, where factories, training bases, and supply chains reach across an ocean. The sound of the engine returns again and again in accounts from Okinawa. Soldiers describe it as constant, inescapable. At night, it fades only to return at dawn. During daylight, it blends with explosions and artillery fire, yet remains distinct, steady, confident, unhurried. For Japanese commanders listening from bunkers and caves, it becomes a reminder that time itself favors the enemy. The transformation is not ideological conversion, but recognition. The idea that Japan can win through endurance alone begins to erode. Even the most committed officers understand that courage cannot ground aircraft, and sacrifice cannot manufacture fuel. The Corsairs dominate not because of individual heroism, but because they are replaceable, and their pilots are meant to live, learn, and return to fight again. As the Okinawa campaign drags on, kamikaze attacks inflict damage on the U.S. fleet, but they do not break air superiority. Corsairs intercept many attackers before they reach their targets. The skies remain largely American-controlled until the end of the battle in June 1945. By then, Okinawa lies devastated, and Japan's remaining air power is nearly exhausted. In the epilogue of this moment, the engine sound lingers as memory. For those who heard it from below, it represented inevitability. For historians, it symbolizes something larger, the triumph of industrial democracy over militarized scarcity. The Corsair in the Okinawa sky is not just a weapon, it is the audible proof of a system that values production, logistics, and the preservation of its people. Long after the engines fall silent, the lesson remains. Control of the sky is control of time, movement, and choice. Over Okinawa, Japanese commanders learned that modern war is not won by belief alone, but by the capacity to sustain freedom of action without end. And in that endless roar above the island, the future of the Pacific War became impossible to ignore.